All right, I see the recording is going, so thanks Taina and all 51 people who are here with us live and all of the folks that are going to watch this after. I know it's really hard right now to show up for something, even if it's just watching a Zoom or sitting through a Zoom to get a question answered, so I appreciate everybody that has the strength to keep fighting for your loved ones and joining us tonight. So. Thanks to all of you that are doing work on this and that are here with us. So do you want to go ahead and put the slides up? So the first slide is just a little description of who the Prisoner Advocacy Network is. We started out of the hunger strikes in CDCR in 2011 and 2013. A lot of folks that were visiting people in Pelican Bay and Corcoran with other groups were members of the National Lawyers Guild, and folks that were leading the hunger strikes, their families and supporters asked the National Lawyers Guild to do more individual advocacy to support people so they could do their political advocacy with the more time and support they had. So we started the Prisoner Advocacy Network. We're all volunteer and we run out of San Francisco. And our website is prisoneradvocacynetwork.org, and we have a COVID-specific site, and I'll walk you through a lot of the materials on that site. A lot of the materials are based on questions we got in the previous webinars, so there's a lot of guides and answers to questions there. We also have a Facebook with some videos, and our email address is up there. We also have a COVID-specific mailing list you can sign up for to get updates. Next slide, please. So PAN is all volunteer, and there's some things we can do and we can't do. So I thought I'd tell you, if you're not familiar with us, before we get into the Q&A. I'll probably talk for about an hour, and then we'll probably have an hour of Q&A. So we can, for COVID and for other things, compile people's testimonies, provide legal analysis on what rights certain conditions in CDCR might violate. We have a survey right now about that. We can provide trainings. We do a lot of trainings for loved ones and a lot of trainings in conjunction with released folks and other people working across medical, legal, and advocacy. We make a lot of instructional guides and videos, and you can contact us if there's specific information and guides you'd be looking for COVID. We can write large-scale demand letters about conditions, so not taking on a particular case, but saying, you know, at this institution or largely we're hearing this, this, and this about COVID. We can communicate that to the governor, legislature, CDCR staff. We can file Public Records Act requests and get information about what's going on according to CDCR and the information they release. And we can track the litigation that's going on in COVID and provide summaries. And a lot of that stuff is already on our website, but we can continue doing that. We don't have the capacity as a small volunteer group to provide any individual case advice, individual advocacy that affects just one person, file anything in court, take phone calls, mail things to people, or give you attorney referrals. We'd love to be able to, but we just don't have capacity. Next slide. So today I'm going to talk about creating a paper trail if you're asking for a change in the conditions in CDCR specifically. I'm not going to talk about jails or the federal system, but PAN works just in CDCR. So I'll talk about CDCR and creating a paper trail for either change to the conditions or asking for release due to COVID. Next slide, please. So right now, there are a few places that you would be directing your paper trail to. And I'm going to talk about the cases to give you a little context first, and then we'll get into what you can do. And we have lots of longer videos and manuals on what you can do. So right now, if you want to identify as somebody who wants to be released or get some other action, there's a few people who might be able to do that. So CDCR in the Plata and Coleman decisions, which I'll talk about, is one route that can lead to release. If the courts order CDCR to do that, CDCR can do it on their own accord as well. And we know that CDCR already completed the releases it planned to do under Section 8658 of the California Government Code, but people can keep pressuring CDCR and ask for continued release under those emergency powers. In the Plata case, there is a receiver who has taken over medical care in CDCR, CCHCS, and they can also release people through the same 8658 emergency powers section of the government code. The county courts can release people through criminal case resentencing or through a habeas or mandate petition. And we have a guide forthcoming on that, but we do have some samples on our website of those already. The governor can release people through individual or group clemency or other emergency powers. And federal courts can potentially release people through a 1983 suit. Usually it's just injunction or damages, but the existing Plata class action does have a release mechanism, and then through federal habeas petition. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the updates in the Coleman and Plata cases you might already be familiar with. In the slides that I pasted the link to in your chat, there are hyperlinks for what's called the docket in Plata and Coleman, and you can click and see the filings in that if you click on these blue underlined links here. So these cases are long-standing cases against CDCR seeking better conditions, reducing overcrowding, improving medical care, mental health care, and other things. So in the proceedings so far, the judges have not yet said that CDCR practices are unconstitutional. They've said that CDCR's policies, as CDCR is putting on the website and putting forth in exhibits to the filings in this court case, look constitutional so far, but the court said they'll keep reviewing them. So it's important for your advocacy and your paper trail to know the government can have a policy that's constitutional, but when in reality the practice on the ground and the actions of staff don't meet that policy, then in practice, those actions aren't constitutional. So under the law, there are policy claims and practice claims. And right now you're going to be wanting to create a paper trail to show that in practice what CDCR is doing in response to COVID is unconstitutional and asking for release from that. So right now there's ways you can prepare evidence that would be admissible in court about how dangerous and deadly the conditions are, and basically everything you're seeing that's different from what CDCR is saying is happening. Next slide. So today there was a filing in this case. Every couple of weeks there are what's called case management conferences, and before these conferences, the plaintiffs and defendants file statements. They're joined together in a case management statement, and both sides give their version of what they think is happening. So today, there was a filing about 3:15 today, and it said, as of just before 2 o'clock on Wednesday, May 13th, 535 patients have been confirmed to have COVID via testing. So obviously we know a lot of people haven't been tested and have COVID, but there are more access to testing kits right now. So more people have been tested and tested positive. And it talks about the increase in the locations of the increases. And then it says 27 patients, including 25 from CIM, are in an outside hospital. Next slide, please. It discusses the additional deaths since the last filing. So now there's been 5 deaths, all people at CIM, and they were all people that the Plaintiffs' Counsel had warned CDCR had existing medical conditions that were serious that made them at risk for COVID. They were housed in predictably dangerous and deadly conditions, large dorms, where the plaintiffs' attorneys had asked CDCR to get people out of those dorms. One 65-year-old man who died was scheduled to parole in just a few months. And before he was diagnosed, he twice asked medical staff in writing to help him get an early release due to his conditions, including severe breathing problems, which made him susceptible to severe consequences from COVID. So the plaintiffs asked to prevent more unnecessary deaths. The receiver or the defendants must expedite review and release or transfer. And I know the Ella Baker Center is trying to chronicle all of the deaths in custody and provide memorials for people. So I just wanted to take a moment to honor that and recognize that now. So next slide. So these filings today go into the new outbreaks that have been identified at CIM. There's also outbreaks at CIW that weren't as discussed here, but are on the CDCR website today. It goes into which dorm facilities are quarantined and what patients are getting what kind of testing. So right now there's 6 tents at CIM housing people with porta potties and portable sinks, and 8 tents where people are receiving their medical care. Also, it noted that there's the predictable staff shortages due to COVID, and that now food is being served cold in boxed lunches instead of hot. And in this filing, the plaintiffs noted that defendants are continuing to have no strategy that's specifically addressing vulnerable people who would be more likely to die from COVID. Next slide. So the medical providers in CCHCS developed an online database where they have already identified who is at risk, but the custody folks in CDCR aren't using that for anything and don't have a plan to use it. But in terms of thinking about the records that have been generated, one thing you can try to do is to get the records to show that you are at risk, or get your loved one's records to show that they're at risk. And we have a video and an instructional guide on our website for that. So what the plaintiffs asked today in their filing was for medical staff to evaluate whether people are housed appropriately. Custody staff instead of medical staff have been making some decisions, including double selling people, one who is sick and waiting for test results and one who isn't. And so they asked to stop that. And there is a critique in the plaintiff's filing of what CDCR says is cohorting, and the memo that came out 2 days ago that CDCR makes some recommendations, but they're not enforceable, that basically say that the incarcerated people are responsible themselves for social distancing, as opposed to staff creating schedules and timeframes to separate the cohorts from other people in shared areas. So they're asking here, the plaintiffs, before the case management conference for more enforcement on that. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thanks. The big announcement in the last filing that was repeated again today is that CDCR has announced that it anticipates on May 26th that it will resume intake. And the plaintiffs here said that if you don't release people and you start an intake of bringing people into the reception centers, there's going to be an incredible rise in cases from the 2-month backlog where people haven't been moved from the jails to the reception center. And CDCR has no plan to safely house people, test people, and stop transmission through that. But CDCR appears to plan to go ahead with that on May 26th unless the court intervenes. So there is now an increased testing capacity of 10,000 tests per month. And their plaintiffs here are asking for a plan, if that is to happen, to test people more broadly. Next slide. In today's filing, CDCR also made some claims. They say that movement is cohorted as much as possible, and they say that people aren't supposed to be mixed with people from different housing units. People should walk together with their cohort to the dining halls, but distant from each other and distant from other cohorts. And when required to ducket, then ducketing would be going through housed cohorts as much as possible, and showers would be as much as possible together. It's not binding. They're not agreeing to do any particular schedule or enforce that, but it's recommendation that CDCR made to their staff through this memo. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So there were a bunch of filings before this, and I won't go into all the details, but I did provide some information for you on the details of what CDCR announced when. And if you see conditions on here that are different from what your loved one is experiencing, it's important to 602 that, to document that, to write a declaration or anything like that in, and bring it to officials to ask for release. So This was when they announced on May 6th the auxiliary housing units in gymnasiums and tents. Next slide. And this is just showing you where, if your loved one is at a particular facility that has moved people into gyms. This is the cleaning schedule. This is the restriction for day rooms. Oh, can you go forward again? Yeah, the cleaning schedule. One of the other things they announced is, per policy, CDCR will not sanction the use of discipline or force on inmates who exercise their free will, quote unquote, and choose not to socially distance. So there isn't supposed to be 115, 128, or use of force for not following the recommendations. Next slide. And so this is what CDCR was claiming in terms of modifications to day rooms and to dining and to lines and other potentially congregate situations. Next slide. So this is saying that staff won't be segregated and assigned to cohorts. Staff is going to continue moving throughout the facility. Both medical and custody staff won't be relegated to particular areas. Next slide. Okay, this is back in April 29th, talking about problems with housing people together who have different symptoms. Next slide. And this was CDCR announcing on April 29th that it will coordinate the provision of hotel rooms for people who are being released on parole and still have a quarantine period but don't have a place to go during their quarantine. Next slide. This is about restricted access to outdoor time. There is, according to the public health officials, no medical or public health reason people can't go outside, even if they're medically isolated. They just can't mix with other people who aren't medically isolated. So that's an issue to bring up in your appeals if that's happening. Next slide. And this was a May 8th order in a different case. This is the Coleman case. Both of these cases come together sometimes in front of a 3-court judge panel, but the May 8th order was in Coleman, and the Coleman judge is issuing more stringent orders than the Plata judge. And so the head of healthcare, Dr. Bick, noted that of the people tested and diagnosed with COVID, 71% are people on the mental health caseload, many of whom live in open dormitories. So as predicted, that wasn't a surprise. Next slide. The announcement in May 8th was that defendants have said there's no horizon. So CDCR and the healthcare system in the state have said that according to their head of medical, Dr. Vick, that every credible scenario I've seen from infectious disease and public health experts includes ongoing transmission of COVID over the next 12 to 24 months until there's significant, quote, herd immunity and hopefully a vaccine. And this is, in my opinion, going to significantly change how we interact in group settings and congregate living environments for the foreseeable future, how we feed, house, program, group therapy, yards, showers, and the like. So this is to say that the lockdown that was announced, well, the modified program that CDCR called a lockdown in, I think it was the 7th of April it was announced, and it was only supposed to be for 14 days, is presumably going to last 12 to 24 months. So that was as of May 8th. Next slide. Okay, next slide. That one was just talking about how about 25% of people coming in from jails will also be on the mental health caseload. And this was back on April 20th when there wasn't enough protective equipment. So this describes what was happening from CDCR's perspective about the unavailability of protective equipment. Next slide. We're almost at the end of this part. Okay, next slide. This was the order that most people heard about. So this was back on the 17th of April. This was a technical order based on a particular provision of the Prison Litigation Reform Act. And it doesn't mean that there can't be a finding that the conditions are unconstitutional in the future. But at this time, Coleman judges and the Plata judges got together under this 3-judge panel, and they said the court cannot conclude that defendants' actions are constitutionally deficient. So they said there's not evidence right now of violations of rights. Basically, the CDCR, and there's multiple defendants, but we'll say CDCR here, have implemented several measures to promote increased physical distancing. And basically they're saying the policy CDCR says they're going to do or started is enough. The judges also go on to say if the court were in the governor's or secretary's position, CDCR secretary, it might adopt additional or different measures. But the question before the court is not what it thinks is the best possible solution. Rather, the question is whether defendants' actions to date are reasonable. So they found the actions to be reasonable so far, but they said they're going to keep hearing new evidence every couple weeks. Next slide. So given all of that so far the judges have had that information presented to them, have had CDCR's policies as are posted on their website, as are submitted as exhibits. What your task would be to do to advocate for your loved ones to get better conditions or get released is to create a paper trail to show that's not what's really happening. So let's go over how to do that. Next slide. So we have a few steps identified, and there's guides to each one of these steps on our website with more extensive videos. So I won't go into that, and I'll leave more time today for Q&A. You would want to be able to identify and describe why somebody is high risk for COVID-19. Our website has a long list of risk factors that are longer than the Center for Disease Control, and we have citations to prove that those things are at risk. So you can go there and see what is a risk factor and identify as having a risk. And then what you can do as folks outside is to make a medical release plan and parole plan. One thing that's been happening here in this litigation is DAPO, the adult parole, have been submitting declarations about this new and more comprehensive parole planning process that they're doing because of COVID. Interestingly enough, the former head of DAPO submitted a declaration saying you can't, at the time where there's less staff resources, increase what you're doing or say you're going to increase what you're doing just to prevent people being released. So what you can do is meet these heightened standards that a lot of courts have been looking at. A lot of courts have wanted people to have a specific address to go to and a plan for how they're going to do their quarantine and live during COVID with such big changes happening in society. So you can write a letter like you would for a regular parole plan saying what you would do to support. So that's something that's very helpful. There's information about that that's going to be posted to our website soon. Then our website also has a video of important forms. Yeah, if you can go back to, thank you. Important forms for people to send from the inside out and from the outside in. So there's a video about that and some instructions, and then you can actually download the forms yourself. We have instructions and a resource guide on how to turn the facts of what's really going on into the kind of exhibits and declaration that are admissible in court. Basically, you want to write up in a chronological time frame and attach proof of everything you're saying. And there's instructions for how to do that. And you could use that for resentencing in the county court. You could use it for a habeas. You could give it to the prison law office or Rosenbein and Galvin for Plata and Coleman, or use it for commutation. And then our website also has a guide to drafting appeals specific to COVID. We provide specific language on risk factors, on what we know about CDCR's response, and suggestions of what people should be attaching to their 602s and help people with understanding specific to COVID, what we know on the outside that folks on the inside might not have access to in terms of all the cases that are happening and the research. We also have a list of cases nationwide on our website that you can see. And then we have a list of the officials and other advocates you would want to send that information to, and then you would file your request. So those are the steps to do if you want to request release, and there's hours and hundreds of pages on our website showing you how to do that. Next slide, please. One other resource that's really important right now is making a medical release plan and signing up for healthcare. The Transitions Clinic Network has a hotline folks can call, 1-844-TCN-WELL, and they can help folks who are inside with planning their reentry, social service, signing up for Medi-Cal, mental health services, and all those kinds of things are helpful in putting together a plan when you're asking for release. Next slide. So there are a couple specific things that I'll touch on briefly, but our website goes more into. There are ways to seek release at the county level at your county of conviction and the county level at the county the prison is in. So you can contact your public defender and ask for help with resentencing under 1170 D1. The public defender and the DA could discuss that. CDCR could potentially make a referral. They said they're not doing any yet for COVID, but hopefully with some more advocacy pushing them to, they will. But the DA can initiate resentencing and has been in San Francisco during the times of COVID. There are a lot of changes to county court processes. You can go on the Judicial Council website and you can find all this information on PAN's website to see what's going on in the specific county of conviction or the county where the prison is. You can also file a habeas corpus petition, and you file that one in the county where the prison is, challenging the conditions of confinement. And we have a guide that we're still working on that hasn't come out yet that will help you with that. Next slide. And this slide is just for your information on the difference between those things I just said. So if later on you want to go back to it, you have that. And we have guides to 1170 on our website. Next slide. So once you've put together all this information about why a person needs to be released, there are different things you can do with it. The Prison Law Office and Rosenbein, Galvin, Grunfeld are the firms that are representing people. All of the people in CDCR already under Plata and people on the mental health caseload under Coleman. And they are taking emails. There's a web form for Rosenbein, Prison Law Office. Their email is up on the screen with your declarations, with your exhibits, with your attachments. And if you can show them how what CDCR is saying is happening, very different from what your loved one is experiencing, it can help with the litigation to prove what's really going on and how that's different from what CDCR is saying the policy is. And that could mean the difference between the judges saying the policy is enough or the practices are unconstitutional, even if the policy says they're doing something. You can also package all these documents up and get them to the public defender's office to ask if they could do something in the county of conviction. Next slide. You can present clemency. If you've already started your commutation, you can ask again to be reviewed, and Governor Newsom's information is up there. Legislators can help you. Legislators in your home district and the district you're incarcerated in may help with advocacy, and there's contact information for them. Also up here is the email covid19@cdcr.ca.gov. You could email that and ask for review and release. And loved ones can write to all these folks and not just folks inside. Next slide. Our website also has additional people you could write to. It has the contact information for the receiver, for Secretary Diaz, the Undersecretary of Healthcare Services, the Director of Adult Institutions. Next slide. The 1170 contact email for CDCR, and the contact for the board. If people have gone before the board and been found suitable but haven't yet been released, they should contact the Board of Parole hearings and ask for expedited release, as well as contacting the governor during the waiting period and pressure the governor to release. And the contact information is on there. Next slide, please. So on our website, there's instructional videos. Here's a picture of the videos. So you can go ahead and look for more information there. Next slide. And these are a list of the guides that we have on the website to administrative appeals. One is a one-stamp guide that you can mail in. One is a much longer guide with more examples. It takes more than one stamp. One is a guide to drafting declarations. And then we have some slides that go with the videos that are also helpful that people asked us to put up on the website. Next slide. Then we have forms that you can get folks on the inside to fill out to make you authorized to get information. And we have a whole training about that. So these are forms that are specific to CDCR on our website. And then we have the court forms if you're trying to help somebody with a commutation, a habeas, or anything in the federal courts with a 1983 or a habeas. We put all the forms on our website in one place. Next slide. And then we put a bunch of self-help legal guides on there. We didn't make all these, but these are helpful for different kinds of proceedings you might be involved in. Next slide. And we put together contact information. The first one is specific for COVID, going through all of the CDCR and attorney contacts and court contacts as of this month. So that's all up to date. And if you click on that, it has names and contact information for everyone. Next slide. And this is just a long slide of all the contact information that's on the website. And I think that's it other than the surveys. So Initiate Justice has a report card you should do. If you want us to know what's going on and include information that you have in our general advocacy and letters to CDCR or the governor or legislators, fill out the survey, let us know if we can share it. And we will also use this information in the guides in providing examples of what people are facing and how it's different from what CDCR says they're doing. So that is a bunch of information that you'll have access to online after. So let's go to Q&A unless you want to do something else, Taina.
I just wanted to say, well, first of all, thank you, Caitlin. I just wanted to say something about the survey really quickly, and I'm going to go ahead and drop it in the chat box as well. Initiate Justice, you know, we've been hearing a lot of different things from members inside and, you know, from folks on the outside who have incarcerated loved ones about how the prison that they're at is responding to COVID. So what we are in the process of doing is we want to create like a report card for each facility that will rate each prison on how well they've been responding to COVID. So how well they've been doing social distancing or providing masks and soap and hand sanitizer and all of those things. So if you have an incarcerated loved one right now, we'll ask you to please fill out that survey. Please only fill out one per facility. So even if you know 5 people at one facility, only do one. But if you know people at different facilities, you can fill out the survey for each facility. We'll be collecting this information between now and the end of the month. And then we're gonna be putting the report cards together and sharing the information with CDCR to advocate to ensure that people inside are, you know, protected from coronavirus. So, you know, obviously the best thing that we can do is advocate for people to get out. So you should definitely take advantage of the resources that Caitlin shared here. But in the meantime, for the folks who are still there, we want to make sure the CDCR is doing everything that they can to keep them safe. So I'm gonna put the link to the survey in the chat box, but I just wanted to offer a little bit more background on that. But yeah, we can go ahead and move to Q&A. I'm looking here and I'm seeing
the first few in order.
Mm-hmm.
So 1170 right now, there's 2 updates. One is that there is an emergency regulation, what they call an EON, where they bypass public comment, that CDCR has put forward with their proposed process and the process they're using now with their cohorts and all these exclusions. A bunch of us, but the Elliott Baker Center is heading that. Elliot and Emily are the people contact there, have been organizing to get people's comments and testimony about why the exclusions are bad and why CDCR's proposed categories are bad. That's one thing people can do, get involved in that organizing, contact the Elliott Baker Center. James is also onboarded to that recently, and there was a big webinar on that. That was great. June 5th, the Judicial Council has also proposed some bad rules, and they're asking for input on that. So James and Emily and Elliot are organizing around that. So those are two things around 1170 for how you could get involved in improving the process, especially if you face the summary denial. Definitely contacting the public defender or the attorney who handled that would be important. There was a proposal from CDCR to, as of June 1st, change the 602 process. What I heard from legislative staff this week is that with a $54 billion deficit, CDCR has stopped anything that would require an increase in expenditure, like, for example, moving the DJJ under the Department of Public Health. I don't know if they're going forward with everything June 1st the way they planned, because I assume they would have to do a lot of staff training and printing. And I don't know with the deficit if it means that those regulations will be out there. But if you look up the Office of Administrative Law website, you can find the 1170 regulations and the new 602 regulations. It's now a two-step process. It's bad, of course, it's always bad, but some of you, I think, probably testified at the hearing that was partially about that in the budget committee before COVID. I think some folks were there. So that's what I have to say about 602 and 1170 that people might not know. I don't have an answer about what happened with the Ninth Circuit and when they will release. Yes, for commutations, I think if you already resubmitted before COVID, it doesn't hurt to contact Eliza. And Eliza's contact information is up on our website, and to just resubmit because you're submitting new evidence. So you would be compiling information about the risk factors specific to the person's situation that make them really need the expedited release, and that didn't exist probably when you prepared your commutation packet. So anything you have with healthcare records or 602s that you want to share that show, if you have comorbid factors for risk or something like that, if you're in a dormitory setting where both there's an increased risk of transmission and an increased risk of death, you would want to share that information, which is new since you last submitted. I don't have a specific answer on if you're facing retaliation for 602. You can file a separate 602 about retaliation if you want to create a paper trail. So if your 602 is, I'm being forced to share shower, toilet, and day room with people, and I can't stay 6 feet away from them, and some of them are sick. That's one issue under your 602. A separate issue is when I filed the 602, the staff person I turned it into ripped it up. Then you would file a separate 602 under your right to be free from retaliation. And there are some good guides on that you can find online for free. The Prison Law Office General Handbook is now free on their website. The Center for Constitutional Rights has a guide. Columbia has a guide, and then there are not free resources. The Jailhouse Lawyers Self-Help Litigation Manual is a good one, and they will tell you about the law about retaliation and documenting that. If you file a suit later on, say you want damages or something like that, and not just release after COVID is over, you would have separate claims for the failure to protect you, exposing you to risk, and then for the retaliation. And the remedies are different for that, and the compensation would be different from that if you file in 1883. I don't have a lot of information about fire camps. Somebody asked about specific information for the fire camps. There was some information in the Plata and Coleman cases, more Plata than Coleman, but I don't have a good summary. I'm sure that other people, some of the 60 people here know more than me. Do I think visitation will be back by the end of the year? I don't want to give more bad news on this call. I'll just say what the public health director in CDCR said is that it's going to be 12 to 24 months before the horizon ends. And I think that unless they had vaccines developed within, we think they're going to be, or from the science I've been reading, within 12 to 24 months, there will be a vaccine, but whether the vaccine will be able to attach to all the different proteins as this mutates is what's sort of taking so long, and developing the labs are taking a long time. But then obviously we know with all the inequities we've seen so far with COVID, but everyone on this call already knew from their lived experience, that isn't going to be distributed equitably. So I imagine until everybody in CDCR is vaccinated, all the staff are vaccinated, there is a risk. And then I don't know if they're going to make people do like a TB test when you go to school or something, and proof that you're vaccinated. I've seen something about travel papers and other contexts. So I don't know if for visiting, you're going to need to show that you've been vaccinated. I'm not sure exactly what's going to go on with, there's obviously problems with the serum test, and we know there's a few kinds of testing and they're not necessarily accurate. There's false negatives and false positives. So I don't know if they would allow people to have a test to say, oh, I had the antibodies, I had it, but somehow I'm not contagious now. And then go in for visiting. There hasn't been a lot of briefing about that in the case right now because it's so focused on immediate intervention and potential release, not long-term conditions. I do think you should 602 it, you should brief it. One of the things we're working on for our self-help litigation guide is the effects of long-term lockdown. Long-term lockdown isn't addressed in most of these cases because they're emergency cases filed as fast as people could. Usually it takes months or years to really brief a case and to get experts. But right now, everyone's just so worried about how many people are going to die and trying to get everything done as quickly as possible to release people, because we know that's the only way to keep people safer. And so I think there isn't a lot on the long-term effects. So we didn't know there would be this indefinite lockdown until they announced on April 7th, they were going to do it for 14 days. Obviously, we know that it's continued, but now that the director of health is saying there's no sort of foreseeable horizon for 12 to 24 months, I don't know what's going on. But there are a ton of people organizing about free access to tablets and phone calls, and also the perils of getting private companies involved in providing those in the long term, and the risks of taking away the really important in-person visits. So there's a ton of campaigns to get involved with if that's an issue you care a lot about. Taina, are you nodding because you want to say something, or?
I was nodding because I was thinking about the potential unintended consequences around, giving so much power to these private companies. Yeah, and just kind of thinking through what the future is going to look like. So no, I don't have anything to add. I'm just reflecting on it.
Hard to know people's reflections with the Zoom, if it's the sparkly hands or the snaps.
Yeah.
Yes, another question is about mental health resources. So I would contact Rosenbein and Galvin if you have a specific need. One of the things that in Plata, there is a receiver. In Coleman, there is a, quote, special master, and the special master is monitoring, and there are these huge exhibits being attached in Coleman that you can download that are like 50-page long plans for mental health care, and there's tiers of things. And so you can read what's there and see if what they're saying is supposed to be happening is what's happening with your loved one. And then you can contact Rosenbein and Galvin to let them know, and they can do individual advocacy potentially under the existing suit, or bring things in the COVID specific things. They already have meetings through the existing suit before COVID at each facility monitoring what's going on. And Rosenbein and PLO have access to medical records, so they can see all the notes about what's happening. They can't share it with you because it would violate a court order, but they at least have access to know, so they can see when people are leaving the cell, what appointments are happening, if there's some kind of like telemed groups and people are in front of video prompters, or there's like worksheets we're hearing about right now. So that's who would be able to help with that one. This is not the forum for pretrial cases and facilities, but on our website, there's a lot of links to public defender organizations in the state and federal level, and you can see a lot of the memorandums and the cases that they're filing. They're filing some what are called writ of mandates. Sometimes they're filing direct appeals, skipping the Superior Court and going to the appellate court on issues about the pretrial cases. So I don't have the expertise to tell you a ton about that, especially not in your county.
Yeah, if folks have other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We still have plenty of
Yeah, you got me a long time.
Yeah, we have plenty of time. Something that I would want to ask Caitlin, and I don't know if you have any insight on this or not. Governor Newsom had said early on that he was not going to release any, quote, violent criminals. And it seems like from everything that CDCR is stating in these most recent filings that they don't really have any other plans of releasing folks. Have you heard of the governor planning to move on that, or CDCR maybe trying to accelerate the release of some other folks who are going to come home soon? Or is your sense?
I've heard that everybody in Initiate Justice is an amazing advocate with the kind of capability to run a public campaign to pressure him and his ding-dong people making these ding-dong decisions. So I think if anyone can make it happen, all of you can. I haven't heard anything secret to share with you about that. I think you're right on that. When Newsom came, we all knew that he wouldn't have the same issues with his legacy as Brown had, and wanting to address his legacy and make right all the wrongs some of the wrongs he did. And we know that he has higher political ambitions for presidential runs or whatever. So the two categories that he has really dehumanized and denigrated and just acted in a really unconscionable ways, let people who have convictions under 667.5 for violent, or people who are registrants on the 290 registry for past sex offenses. And so we know those two categories are ways that he and other people have used to say, no matter how much time you serve, no matter how different you are, we're not going to give a chance to show you that you are safe for release, right? And we know that with parole, he rescinded a lot of people's, he sent a lot of people to en banc that fell under those criteria, especially the sexual offenses, to kind of make sure that he didn't have all of the responsibility for that. So we know that those are two things that since well before COVID, he has had concerns with having on his legacy. So I wish I had better news, and I think that it will take a lot of advocacy. I think that the cases have not spread as fast as I thought that they would in CDCR. Not that that's much consolation, because we know that they will continue to spread, but I think that there has been an amazing amount of movement in other places, and usually California is out in front, and we're not out in front right now for the prisons. We're out in front in the jails, and that's because of organizers like you all that have humanized, I know I said that before, but have made real what it means to have a loved one who isn't sentenced to death be sentenced to death by the inaction of the administration, and putting that on their conscience is, I think, what it's going to take for people to, people in the horseshoe, the governor's office, to start doing more mass clemencies. So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. And I figured that was probably the case, but I figured I'd ask if you knew anything that we didn't. For sure, we'll continue to push. And in that vein, I want to just make a plug, once again, for you all filling out the survey for the report card. That information is going to be really, really useful for us. That's our evidence, so that when we go to CDCR, we can say all right, I know that you all are telling us that this is what is happening, but this is what families and what people who are inside are reporting in terms of what is actually happening, and we're going to use all the information that we collect to continue to put pressure on them. So please do fill it out, share it widely. Feel free to share it with all of your networks, social media. It's open to anybody who is supporting an incarcerated loved one.
And I think 2 points that I think specific to your group would make sense is, you all did so much on Prop 57 and programs. Now with this huge deficit, they're going to cut all the programs first And so we know that anything that you can bring to legislators, to bring to CDCR, or bring to the governor's staff about budget savings will be the most important thing in the framework right now. So in terms of how do you address this $54 billion deficit with, CDCR having the lion's share of the entire state budget, anything that reduces the budget will be helpful in advocacy. So obviously reducing the number of people reduces the budget. And what's really inverse with what they're doing with COVID is the sickest people cost the most, right? So more than $85,000 average a year. And those are the folks that they're should be releasing that they're not releasing. And the issue with that already identified population, if you look in the court filings, CDCR already knows who those folks are with the risk factors for COVID with the higher expenditures. And when they're sick, we know that there's going to be long-term disabilities because of COVID that we're just learning about. So when people are on a ventilator, they have pulmonary issues, they have cardiac issues, they have liver and kidney issues. People are going to be on oxygen, people are going to be on dialysis and have these permanent disabilities where they're going to need these assistive devices that are really, really expensive. And so preventing that, even though it is not, it's not the righteous framework or the framework I think we all feel more affinity towards, that it's not the most ethical way to advocate for people. As a pragmatic way, you're going to be able to get more people on your side with campaigns right now that show the cost-saving nature of doing what we think is the right thing morally and ethically, but might only come from a fiscal standpoint. So I think that that's something with your work on Prop 57 and programs and saying, oh, well, now if you're going to deny everyone programs with indefinite lockdown, like that's a problem with Prop 57. And anywhere where you can show a high risk, high cost people medically that need to be released, it's also going to ease the budget. So those are two things that I think specific to initiate justice.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, and if I can add to that, I think most folks on this call are probably aware that this year Initiate Justice was co-sponsoring a bill with the Ella Baker Center and Restore Justice on programming and credits. And what that bill would have done was increase access to good time credits and programs for folks inside. The bill ended up getting dropped because of COVID and because the legislature was asked to severely limit the amount of bills that they were working on. And we fought really hard to keep that bill alive because we recognize like how important it is, because there was also provisions in the bill to keep programming happening even when there was a lockdown or an emergency situation such as this. The bill ended up getting dropped inevitably, but that is something that we know for sure is going to continue to be a priority for us next year. So next year for sure we're going to be doing legislation work on programming, and we'll be fine-tuning exactly what that'll look like. So, please continue everybody to stay involved and offer your input in terms of what you think we should be working on in the coming year.
There was a follow-up question about commutation, and I think that right now, if you have any new information and medical release factors, even if you had a commutation that wasn't approved before, you should present those new factors about the risk to somebody's health and life, but you should also present a comprehensive plan for keeping somebody safe when they're released in the community with the continuity of medical care, phone-based services, groups, programs, whatever, sponsors, stuff like that, and any sort of financial support or remote work that somebody could do, any of that that's new, that's specific to COVID, even if you haven't been approved before, I think is helpful. There's a question about the voluntary quarantine. So some people want a family visit, I think, FV, I'm assuming it's family visit, but correct me if I'm wrong, back, to sign a paper where they would voluntarily quarantine for 14 days after the visit. I don't think that's realistic from a liability standpoint from CDCR because each person potentially transmits COVID to 4 people, and any visitor that would come in that could transmit to 4 people, whatever the purpose, would be seen as a big liability. So whether that person is clergy or doing a program or education, even those folks aren't allowed in, and they're required by law. So something like a family visit, which isn't necessarily required in the same way, I don't think CDCR would let you what's called waive the duty in terms of tort law for that by just signing a paper. There's another question I got about filing complaints if there's officer misconduct. There is a citizen complaint form, which we have on our website that's specific to CDCR, and you can file something with them. You can file something with the Office of the Inspector General. You can file something with Internal Affairs. And there are external agencies. Somebody asked if it is the FBI. If there was a federal offense at issue, some kind of like cross-state activity or something that's specific like a terrorism charge or something, you could potentially report something like that to the FBI, but I imagine that a lot of those things would be more state level, and you'd in the county where the prison is, you would report it to the officials there. Question about what CDCR is calling the horizon. So the question is about visiting and whether it will be open for 12 to 24 months and whether this is written anywhere. I only have seen this announced in the litigation. So I haven't seen anywhere on the CDCR website. They did post new stuff today, including the memo that I referenced earlier. But I don't think that they're posting anything about what they're calling the horizon of the virus and when the testing would be available, which I think is going to be when they start allowing activities to resume when everyone's been tested. I presume, I'm not sure, but there isn't an announcement about that. The only announcement is what the director of healthcare is saying about programs not returning to normal until that time period. But there's no announcement about anything. There isn't conclusive medical evidence, so I don't think CDCR is going to make an announcement for a very long time until there's medical evidence available, which is obviously so frustrating when we're learning new things every day about what we don't know and this horrible situation. How do you get commutation forms? You can go on our website, and our website has a link to the governor's office, and you can print out the commutation form from there, whether you're doing it for the first time or whether you're submitting new updated information.
Great. Are there any other questions? We still have plenty of time. If there are no more questions, that's also fine with me. But I want to give everybody the opportunity to, to chat with Caitlin and ask anything that they might have. And Maria Moore says she has a question, so I'll give you a minute to type it up. Go ahead, Maria. In the meantime, I'll paste the link to the report card survey again so that you don't have to scroll up to see it.
That's an interesting question. Can you update somebody's commutation request even if you aren't in touch with them? If you're not a lawyer, you have different rules. I couldn't, well, that's a different question. I don't have a good answer for you because you would need to know more about the circumstances of what you were sending and why, and if the person had given you permission to send something like that in the past. So that one's a little hard to advise on. If an LWOP was commuted but hasn't gone to the board, can they submit another application for commutation? Can they be commuted twice? You can't be commuted twice, but you could definitely and should definitely contact both the governor's office and the board to say, this thing is pending, this person has this particular medical risk, and they need to be released. The fact that they were commuted shows what we say in the law, prima facie, like on its face, that they are safe to be released. So that determination has already been made, and the board just needs to kind of put the stamp on, and here's all the information we have about medical plan, the release plan, who's going to pick them up, where they're going to live, the financial support they'll have, how they'll get a mask and gloves and stay safe in COVID, and any of that kind of information. So I would definitely reach out to Eliza at the governor's office, and I would reach out to Jennifer Schaefer at the parole board to see if there's anything. The issue, I contacted the parole folks, and the issue with any of their policies changing is that legislation is what changes that, and the legislature hasn't been in session and certainly won't be focused on changing parole standards unless folks here advocate, right? Because we know there's elder parole, medical parole, other kind of compassionate release, but the criteria are so high to meet that they don't mean a lot for a lot of people. And, you know, it's going to be really hard to get a diagnosis that you have less than 6 months to live in the time period that COVID is affecting everything. And so a lot of these standards aren't the good fixes to COVID, but until there's legislative changes to the penal code, the parole board can't just start doing different things and having new processes to release people. So with legislation, they could do that. People could create new cohorts of parole specific to COVID or specific to medical risk, but not end of life medical risk, and not there's a category when you're permanently medically incapacitated and you move to like a community care facility. But right now we know that a lot of those community care facilities won't be accepting people. And that is not a good release mechanism, because once you get well, like say with the NDPF stuff, you know, there's a gentleman who has a case, Mr. Samiago, and he was predictably warned the staff he was going to be attacked, got attacked, and now he's quadriplegic, and they released him to community facility. But if he were to recover, which he never will, he would come back to CDCR instead of being in this medical facility in the community. So that's not a good release mechanism, but there could be advocacy for permanent changes, but criteria that are specific to medically risky people that could be used for COVID, but be a permanent release valve. I know Californians for Safety and Justice are trying to get some stuff in the budget rider. The budget is coming out in the next, Taina, do you know the days? No, it's coming out soon, and all it is cuts. So there was a budget a few months ago. This budget that's coming out is just sort of reductions. So parole, again, a changed and new parole process that could release all these people is something that legislators could propose. It could go along with some kind of budget changes. And so I think that I think that I lost my train of thought because I went back to read the question. And then whatever I was talking about wasn't actually in a written question. Parole processes. Oh, the board for LWAP. So the board for LWAP, it's not like something, so for example, with Prop 57, you know, there are these paper reviews, and since COVID, the board has accelerated how fast they're doing the paper reviews. But with the remote hearings, there's only a certain amount that can be scheduled each day because everybody needs a long time. And so they can't just, with the budget cuts especially, you know, quadruple their staff and schedule as many as people would want in a day because of the way they've done scheduling. One thing people could do, which most people here don't want to do, is advocate for increasing CDCR's budget and get more parole staff and have more hearings happening and changing that. Obviously, you could say, take it away from other things, close a bunch of facilities. The issue with closing facilities with COVID is that putting people closer together or putting people out in tents and gymnasiums is not necessarily the solution people here want either. So before COVID, there were hearings about closing one of the more dilapidated facilities because it'll cost more to repair it, right? And we're still at 137.5% overcrowding. We need to reduce the overcrowding to spread people apart 6 feet for COVID. But we also, as people who normally want to close facilities, are trying to figure out, well, what's the best balance of, in the short term, while people are incarcerated, keeping them far enough away so they don't get infected, and in the long term, getting rid of all these facilities. So that is a question. Yes, Eliza is in the governor's office and her contact information is on the PAN website. I don't know what TNC is.
I think it was the
transitions clinic. The numbers on there is the collect call number for people inside. Yes, the number I read out earlier. They're formerly incarcerated community healthcare workers. Joe Calderon presented our last webinar, but there are a bunch of people who have been through the SF City College program with Ida McCrae, who's also formerly incarcerated, and she trains folks when they get out to be healthcare workers. And so those folks staff the hotline and support people through there. And I'm pulling up the slide to read it again, 1-844-TCN-WELL, Transitions Clinic Network. Yes, collect calls.
I didn't realize that that was that Joe Calderon works for them. I know Joe, he's dope. I know his wife, she's my SE sister.
Cool. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah. All right. Do you see any other questions here, or maybe anything else that you wanted to add, Caitlin, to wrap up?
I'm just grateful that everybody has the tenacity and you're all such fighters and you have the emotional wherewithal despite all of this fatigue, anxiety, depression, everything that everyone must be going through and how scared everyone must be to show up and keep fighting. And I'm inspired by all of you. And I just wish that I had better news to deliver, or there were strategies that existed within the legal system we have to get more relief and to be more conscious and just, and those don't exist. And hopefully through COVID, people will reimagine a new way of living in the world and relating to each other, and prisons will close and people will have healthcare and housing, and people will have enough to live. And we know that obviously with food shortages that are going to happen and unemployment, you know, everything about society is going to change forever out of this moment. And I think visionary people like you are going to be at the forefront of figuring out how to have a society where people are healthier and safer and loved. And I think that I'm taking inspiration in these moments from leaders like all of you. So I guess that's what I have to say. Oh, are you all being sweet in the comments? Thank you.
Everybody really appreciates you, Caitlin. I know that I certainly do. Thank you so much for your time today. And I think that what you said is exactly right. You know, right now it can feel very discouraging. I know like the emotional weight is very heavy, especially for folks whose loved ones are still inside and you're worried about them and worried about when you're going to be able to see them again. But I, you know, just want to remind folks like that we're all here, we're fighting. Initiate Justice is just one of many, many, many organizations that are fighting and advocating, and it may take some time, but I know that we're going to win. Right now is also a really important time for us to be thinking about like what our long-term vision is for prison abolition and how we can, you know, fight for the radical changes that we know need to happen to keep people safe. You know, a pandemic.
Can I add one thing for that?
Yeah.
I think that people have artificially limited the conversation to things that we never thought were possible, but we've been asking for years as the unrealistic people in movement spaces, or going to Sacramento and being the unrealistic people. And we're saying, let everyone out. And a few months ago, when we said that, that was really weird and wild, and people didn't understand that incarceration itself is a public health crisis and puts people in their communities at risk. And now that people are feeling the more direct risk at their communities, I think they're understanding it more. But the limits people still have in their visions about letting everyone out, being the outer bounds of an abolitionist sort of demand right now for COVID, is still an internalized process where we're still trying to be out there but reasonable-ish. And I think that now is the time to talk about the public health and safety issues that prisons cause illness, prisons cause premature death, whether there's this pandemic or the future pandemics we know because of globalization are going to continue to happen. And asking for prison closures is an opening right now that hasn't been on the front of the demand list because it's been so emergency responsive to immediately saving lives, and closing prisons seems unrealistic. But right now, and what the budgets will make possible and people's understanding about how unconscionable the response was and how many thousands, I think the ACLU report that came out last week said there will be 10,000 preventable deaths because of the responses in carceral facilities, that now is the time to not limit your imagination to what you think is realistic.
Right. And I think that prison abolition is more than just, closing down prisons and releasing folks. It's about creating a different social welfare system where we have people who are taken care of in the community so they don't end up in prison in the first place. Because if we had better healthcare systems, if we had, better jobs, higher wages, more access to sick leave and, access to more funding for medical research and vaccines, we wouldn't even be in the situation that we're in now. And those are parts of demands that we include when we're talking about prison abolition. We're talking about people getting care and support in the community so they don't end up causing harm and don't end up in prison in the first place. This system is, just a representation of our, capitalist system that doesn't care for communities. And that's why this pandemic has been able to spread the way that it has. So I think this is a really important moment in history for us to take this opportunity to really shift how we are taking care of folks in our community for the purpose of closing prisons, but also for keeping everybody safe and healthy. So with that being said, I'm encouraging everybody to stay involved in the work. Please join Initiate Justice for all of our webinar Wednesdays and our member meetings, which are the first Wednesday of the month. Next Wednesday, we'll be joined by Greg, who's our policy associate, and a few folks from TPW, which is the the Transformative in Prison work group. And we're going to specifically be talking about programs and how programs are running in the wake of COVID and what we're going to be advocating for in the future. So if you're interested in learning more about programming inside, please join us for our webinar next week. The RSVP form will be emailed and also on all of our social media pages. So yeah, I think that's pretty much where I'll leave it. Let's close prisons, let's take care of the community, and in the meantime, let's fight like hell to advocate for ourselves and our loved ones. Caitlin, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, just a fist. And it's so great to see all the little faces in the whatever view, the gallery view. Hi to everybody. And I'm looking forward to seeing everyone that I've seen before and folks that I haven't met in person in the struggle as it continues.
Yeah, thank you all. Talk to you all soon. Have a good night. Bye.